Your property manager just cost you $4,200 last month. Not because they did anything wrong, because they did almost nothing at all, and you're still writing the check. That's the story I'm hearing from landlords across California right now. And it's not an isolated incident. It's a pattern, a quiet exodus. Independent landlords with 2 units, 5 units, 12 units, people who handed over the keys years ago and assumed the professionals knew best are taking their portfolios back. Not because they're angry, because they finally did the math. So before you renew that management contract, before you sign another year away, you need to hear what's actually happening in 2026. Because the property management industry has a dirty secret, and the landlords who figure it out early are the ones keeping thousands of extra dollars a year. Let's start with the number they sell you on. 8%, maybe 10%. That's the management fee, and on its face it sounds reasonable. Your property rents for $2,400 a month, you pay $192. Someone else handles the headaches. Clean transaction. Logical, except that's not the real number. Talk to any landlord who's actually audited their property management invoices, and most never do, and the story changes fast. There's the leasing fee, typically 1 full month's rent every time a tenant turns over. There's the maintenance markup, usually somewhere between 10% and 20% on top of every contractor invoice. There's the lease renewal fee, the inspection fee, the eviction coordination fee, and sometimes, buried in the fine print, a monthly minimum that kicks in even when your unit sits vacant. A landlord in Sacramento, let's call her Maria, came to this realization last year after 3 years with a mid-size management company. Her unit rented for $1,950 a month. She thought she was paying 8%. When she added up every line item across 12 months, including a tenant turnover that triggered a leasing fee and 2 maintenance calls with markup, her actual cost was closer to 22% of gross rent. She was netting $1,520 a month on a unit that should have been generating $1,800 after basic expenses. That's $3,360 a year. Gone. Not to taxes, not to repairs, not to anything that improves the asset. Just gone. The proof isn't complicated. Pull every invoice from the last 12 months, add them up, divide by your gross annual rent. That's your real management cost. Most landlords who do this exercise for the first time feel a specific kind of sick, the kind that comes from realizing you've been comfortable with a number that was never the real number. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the fee problem is actually the smaller problem. Here's something the property management industry will never put in a brochure. Your tenants don't experience your property. They experience whoever is supposed to be managing it. When your tenant sends a maintenance request on a Friday afternoon and doesn't hear back until Tuesday, they're not frustrated with a faceless company. They're frustrated with you. It's your name on the lease. It's your property. And the relationship damage from slow, bureaucratic property management doesn't stay in the tenant's head. It shows up in your retention numbers. Think about what tenant turnover actually costs you in California in 2026. You've got the vacancy days, realistically 2 to 4 weeks in most markets. You've got the cleaning and touch-up repairs. You've got the leasing fee if your manager finds the next tenant. You've got the administrative time. Conservative math puts the average turnover cost between $3,500 and $5,000 per unit. Some markets, higher. Tenant retention is the single most undervalued financial lever in residential property management. A tenant who stays 3 years instead of 1 year saves you between $7,000 and $10,000 in turnover costs alone, before you even account for rent stability and the 0 vacancy months. There's a landlord in the East Bay, I'll call him David, who self-managed 2 duplexes for years before delegating to a property manager when his job got demanding. 2 years later, he'd had 4 turnovers across his 4 units. His manager was technically hitting all the contractual benchmarks, responded within 48 hours, processed rent on time, filed the paperwork correctly. But tenants were leaving. When David finally called one of his former tenants to ask why, she told him flat out, it just felt like nobody actually cared about the place. That's the responsiveness gap. It's not about speed on a stopwatch. It's about whether your tenants feel like they're living in someone's investment or someone's property. The best property managers close this gap. A lot of them don't. And the landlords who are firing their managers in 2026 aren't doing it because the managers broke rules. They're doing it because they realized that the relationship with their tenants, the thing that actually protects their cash flow, was being managed by someone with 200 other units on their plate. But wait, there's a catch. Some landlords hear the fee math and the retention argument, and they're ready to self-manage tomorrow. And then they remember the reason they hired a manager in the first place. California landlord-tenant law is a minefield, and they don't want to step in it. That fear is legitimate. California has some of the most tenant-protective statutes in the country. AB 1482, the statewide rent control law, caps annual increases at 5% plus local CPI, or 10%, whichever is lower. And it applies to most residential properties built before 2007. Get that wrong, and you're not just returning money, you're potentially facing a claim for wrongful rent increase. Local ordinances in cities like Los Angeles, Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose layer additional requirements on top of the state law. The security deposit rules changed again in 2024. Under the updated Civil Code 1950.5, the maximum deposit for most unfurnished units is now capped at 1 month's rent, down from 2 months. If you're still holding 2 months on a lease signed before the change, and your tenant moves out in 2026, you need to know how to handle that return correctly. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Your property manager may not be keeping up with these changes either. A landlord in San Jose discovered this the hard way when her property manager served a 3-day notice that didn't comply with the updated procedural requirements under CCP 1161. The notice was defective. The eviction got delayed by 6 weeks. 6 weeks of unpaid rent, plus court costs because the person she was paying to handle compliance got the paperwork wrong. Self-management doesn't mean flying blind on California law. It means owning the knowledge instead of assuming someone else has it covered. And increasingly, landlords are realizing that assumption was always risky, because the person you paid to know the law might know it less well than you do after 2 solid weeks of research. Here's the real reason the firing wave is happening now and not 5 years ago. The infrastructure for self-managing a small portfolio in California used to be genuinely difficult. Now it isn't. Tenant screening that used to take days now takes hours. Lease templates built specifically for California compliance, including required disclosures, AB 1482 exemption language, and updated security deposit terms, are available without a law degree. Rent collection that used to require checks, deposit trips, and awkward conversations now runs automatically. Maintenance request tracking, lease renewals, notice delivery. The operational friction that made property managers feel necessary has been systematically reduced. Think about what changed. 5 years ago, a landlord managing 8 units solo was juggling spreadsheets, paper files, and phone tag with contractors. Today, that same landlord has tools that centralize every tenant communication, flag lease expiration dates automatically, and generate legally compliant notices without calling an attorney for every document. The story I keep hearing from landlords who made the switch in 2024 and 2025 is remarkably consistent. The first 90 days are uncomfortable. There's a learning curve. There are moments of why is this happening to me at 9 p.m. But by month 4, they've internalized the rhythm. By month 6, they're wondering why they waited. One landlord in Fresno, managing 6 units solo after parting ways with his manager, told me his net income in the first year of self-management was $11,400 higher than the year before. Same rents, same tenants, same market, just no management layer skimming the top and slowing down the decisions. Now here's a question worth sitting with. If the tools exist to manage your property better than your current manager is managing it, and you're paying 10 to 22% of gross revenue for the privilege of being managed, what exactly are you buying? Not every landlord should fire their property manager tomorrow. Let's be clear about that. If you own properties in multiple states, or if you're genuinely unavailable to respond to tenant needs within a reasonable window, professional management may still make economic sense if your portfolio is large enough that the management fee is a rounding error against your gross income. The calculus is different. Geography, capacity, and temperament all matter, but if you're a California landlord with 2 to 10 units living within an hour of your properties and you're paying someone else to manage relationships and paperwork you could handle yourself, the default assumption that professional management is worth the cost deserves a serious challenge in 2026. The transition itself doesn't have to be chaotic. Review your management agreement for termination clauses. Most require 30 to 60 days written notice, and many have provisions triggered by property sale or owner decision to self-manage. Communicate the change to your tenants directly, professionally, and with clear instructions for where to send rent, and how to submit maintenance requests going forward. Audit your files, lease copies, tenant contact information, maintenance history, deposit amounts on record. Get everything in order before the handoff, not after. The landlords who transition badly are the ones who do it impulsively, who send a termination letter on Monday and haven't set up a rent payment method by Wednesday. The landlords who transition well treat it like a business project, planned, documented, and executed in stages. The difference between those two outcomes is a few hours of preparation. Recap: your real management cost isn't 8%. Audit every invoice and you'll likely find you're paying 15% to 22% of gross rent when all fees are counted. Tenant retention is worth thousands of dollars per unit, and the property managers with the largest portfolios have the least incentive to protect yours. California compliance is complex, but your property manager may not be more current on the law than you are. The eviction notice story isn't unique. The operational tools for self-management have fundamentally changed, and the friction that made managers feel essential has largely been removed, and the transition, done carefully, is not as disruptive as the property management industry needs you to believe it is. The landlords who are winning in 2026 are not the ones who delegated everything and hoped for the best. They're the ones who took the time to understand their own assets, built the systems to manage them intelligently, and stopped paying a premium for someone else's mediocrity. Your portfolio is your business. Manage it like one, powered by LeaseBase intelligence.